Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. For this last episode of 2024, you get 3 flash fiction stories published by Havok and written by Rachel Dib, Jennifer Dyer, and Ryan Bush. They all have midnight or New Year's themes for obvious reasons, so I'm excited to help you all ring in the new year. 1 is narrated by me, and 2 are narrated by Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end of each story to see where you can find more from the authors. This first one is by Rachel Dib, a stay-at-home mom of 3 small children. After marrying a soldier, she left her home state of South Carolina to live in random places across the United States. Her short fiction appears in anthologies published by Havok Publishing, Ye Old Dragon Books, Iron Fairy Publishing, Brigid's Gate Press, and the Last Line Literary Journal. So if you like this one, there's plenty more to find out there. Please enjoy The Midnight Snack by Rachel Dib.
Henry stared wide-eyed at the top of his tent. Was Gerald's snoring growing louder? Sighing, he crawled from his sleeping bag and unzipped the flap. Memories of campfire smoke and burnt hot dogs clung to the crisp night air. His stomach growled. "Might as well have a midnight snack," Henry muttered. "No use being tired and hungry." As he stoked the fire back to life, Henry tried to focus on something besides Gerald's snoring. He failed. No wonder everyone else bailed on this trip once Gerald committed. Scowling, he sank into a lawn chair and skewered a hot dog. Someone could have warned me. A shadow fell across Henry's lap, and he glanced up to see a giant, hairy beast crouched on the other side of the flames. His first thought was bear, but Henry's mind quickly informed him this assumption was incorrect. The creature before him was worse than a bear. While Henry knew he should run or scream, anything besides remain motionless across from the Sasquatch, his body refused to respond. So instead, he stared slack-jawed at the monster.
"Oh, from the snoring I thought everyone here was asleep. Embarrassing,"
the Sasquatch muttered in a low southern drawl. He cleared his throat and pointed to Henry's skewer.
"Any chance you could hand that over before you run away? While I don't mind fishing hot dogs from the fire, I'm not particularly a fan of the ashy coating."
Henry's jaw dropped open a little wider. He tried to cry out, but only managed a wheeze. The Sasquatch made a popping sound with his lips.
"Right. The whole struck dumb thing. Haven't come across that in a while."
He rose to his full height, easily 8 or 9 feet, and motioned to the ice chest beside Henry's chair.
"Do you mind if I—"
Henry wheezed again. Hands up in a defenseless posture, the Sasquatch sidled around the fire and flipped open the chest.
"Oh, you have the good hot dogs. 3 should do it."
Noticing some extra skewers, he selected one and returned to the other side of the flames. Surprisingly, Henry relaxed as the Sasquatch roasted his hot dogs. The giant ape seemed to notice, for he met Henry's eyes with a toothy grin.
"I love hot dogs," he explained. "I'm supposed to wait until campers have fallen asleep and then raid the campsite, but this is so much easier."
Supposed to... Henry choked out.
"It's one of Ranger Joe's rules. If you really need a hot dog, Carl, get a hot dog, but wait until the campers are asleep and pretend to be a bear. That's what Ranger Joe says."
The Sasquatch lowered his chin and eyed Henry narrowly.
"By the way, I'd prefer if you didn't tell Ranger Joe about this. He wouldn't approve."
Henry managed a shrug. "I haven't met Ranger Joe, so—"
"Well, that works then."
The Sasquatch scrutinized his hot dogs, shook his head, and placed them back in the flames.
"I'd never hear the end of it if you did. Carl, I can't believe you showed yourself again. That's what Ranger Joe would say.
Who's Carl?
Who's Carl?
The Sasquatch prodded himself in the chest with large, knobby knuckles.
I'm Carl.
Henry tilted his head. You're a Bigfoot named Carl? The Sasquatch looked down at his feet.
Are they big?
I mean, Henry sunk down in his chair, regretting the comment. Carl chewed his lip.
I suppose compared to yours they're large, but…
He stuck a prehensile foot in the air and wiggled his sausage-like toes.
For my kind, they've always seemed normal, especially for my size.
Of course, Henry quickly agreed. Forget I said anything.
Wait, you said a Bigfoot.
Carl slipped one of the hot dogs from his skewer and took a bite.
Is Bigfoot one of your names for me?
Henry made a non-committal sound and sank lower.
It is, isn't it?
Carl accused, shaking his skewer pointedly at Henry.
Kinda rude. How would you like it if I called you a pale, hairless biped? Bigfoot. I suppose it could be worse. A little south from here, they call me Wood Booger. I mean, who comes up with that?
Carl shook his head.
Would you mind tossing me another hot dog?
Henry flung the package the Sasquatch's way. Carl caught it effortlessly.
And if I travel way south, where it's a bit swampy, they call me a skunk ape.
He poked his new hot dogs into the fire and sat back on his haunches.
I still don't understand that one.
It's weird, Henry admitted, though I wasn't expecting Carl either.
Oh, Carl isn't my real name. It's what Ranger Joe calls me. My real name is…
Carl let out a series of low grunts, followed by a high-pitched howl. Gerald's snoring halted as Carl's howl echoed around the campsite. Henry stiffened. Don't wake up.
Bet you can't pronounce that, though, can you?
Carl asked. Henry shook his head, his eyes glued to Gerald's tent. Snore, darn it! Instead, he heard a slight rustling.
Neither can Ranger Joe.
The Sasquatch popped the last hot dog into his mouth.
Are there any more of these?
Henry shook his head again. Was that a zipper? He swallowed, imagining Gerald's reaction to Carl. He doubted it'd be as quiet as his own.
Too bad.
Carl rose and stretched.
I should probably go anyway.
A light beam flicked on inside the tent, illuminating Gerald's silhouette. Henry snapped to his feet and grabbed the tent's outside zipper, holding it closed. What the… Gerald muttered from within.
Well, it was nice meeting you.
Carl motioned back and forth between them.
And remember, this stays between us.
Henry nodded, gripping the zipper a little tighter as Gerald's tugging grew more insistent. When Carl finally disappeared into the forest, Henry released the zipper. The tent flap flew open. Huh, must have been stuck. Seeing Henry, Gerald jumped. Oh, couldn't sleep either? No, Henry glanced back at the forest. But that turned out to be a good thing.
I hope you enjoyed listening to The Midnight Snack by Rachel Dib, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. Rachel was awarded Havok's most prolific author for 2022 and 2023, so she has several more short stories on Havok's website in their archives. It's only $5 for an entire year's membership, so check that out at gohavok.com. If you want to find the rest of Rachel's short stories, follow her on Instagram at RJ_DIB, and you can find links in her bio. But I'm also going to have a direct link in the show notes. Next up, we have a story by Jennifer Dyer, an award-winning author who spent her childhood aspiring to be a ninja Jedi princess. She writes speculative fiction spanning from swoony, no-spice romantasy to cozy fantasy and thrillers. With a background in martial arts, Jennifer loves weaving action into plots filled with found family and second chances. In February, we featured her super fun story, The Midnight Requirement, and I'm happy to tell you this flash fiction story takes place in the same world. Please enjoy The Midnight Embezzlement by Jennifer Dyer. The harsh lights in the interrogation room stung my eyes as Detective Ironflutter smacked her police-issued wand against her palm and fluttered her wings to loom over me. "Come on, Ivory. Just tell us where the fairy godmother's wand is." I leaned back, but forced my eyes to meet hers. My grandmother used to say a fairy needn't worry if she was guilty. But Gran hadn't spent 2 hours under Ironflutter's sharp gaze. "I don't know where it is." Ugh, I hated the pleading whine coloring my words, but I had to convince her. Ironflutter dropped back to the floor, wings sagging. She flicked her wand, and blue numbers shimmered on the wall. 11:15. Less than an hour until midnight. If the missing wand wasn't recovered by then, another fairy could try to master it, if their magic was strong enough. With a powerful relic like the original fairy godmother's wand, that could mean trouble for all the creatures in Hidden Wood. The detective rubbed her forehead. "Start at the beginning." "You mean when I got the job cleaning the museum?" She shuffled her notes, golden fairy dust shimmering off the paper. "This would be after you flunked out of the Godmother Academy?" "I left the GA. Creative differences with one of the professors." Irritated, I'd corrected her. She swiped a hand across her pink hair. The color enhancement was wearing thin, exposing dark roots. I continued. "Since I've always loved history, I applied at Hidden Wood Museum." I picked at my threadbare uniform. I'd only been able to afford the one, and the seams were fraying. Guess I, too, needed a fairy godmother to help me out. If only. Ironflutter glanced at the mirror behind her, which was obviously a window where Chief Evensong and his deputies were watching. "Were you aware at the time they'd just opened the Cinderella exhibit?" "Wasn't everyone?" If ticket sales were any indication, all of Hidden Wood wanted to see it. "Those miniature pumpkin carriage toys are flying off the shelves, and don't get me started on the pumpkin swirl ice cream." Her eyebrows shot up. "You had an incident with ice cream just before you reported the wand missing, yes?" "Incident? You mean prank. That kid's spell splattered a caramel pumpkin sundae all over the fairy godmother's wand display case. An unbelievable mess. Have you ever seen Zesty Button Top's cream caramel sauce? That stuff is so thick and sticky, it could suffocate spells." "Enough about the caramel." Ironflutter whipped out a quill. "Just give me the facts." "At sunlight, I took a ride on Festo, my Yorkshire Terrier. Then we played fetch, although he hides the sticks, so I have to put retrieval spells on the good ones," she groaned. "What happened with the display case? Did you switch the wand with a duplicate?" I laughed at the insinuation. Me, Ivory Winkleclover, a petty thief? "I told you, the case was covered with caramel after the wand incident. Took me an hour to chisel it off." "But the wand?" I lifted my hands. "Museum security had sealed the case with locking spells. The wand was there while I was cleaning. Afterward, it disappeared." "Stop lying, Winkleclover." I stare at my wand held captive in Ironflutter's pocket. This would be the perfect time for Gran's "do it my way" spell. One tiny swish, dab, and flick could have the detective's expression shifting from narrow-eyed suspicion to an open smile, willing to do whatever I asked. Ironflutter leaned on the table. Your grandmother and the fairy godmother had a falling out. What happened? Gran didn't like to talk about it. If you don't have anything else, I'll just be— Not so fast. What happened after the ice cream incident? The way she emphasized that word. I took a break and played fetch with Festo. Bless him. He waits outside while I work. She cast another "Tell me the time" spell. 11:30. The minutes were running out, and the queen would pitch a fit. If the wand wound up under the wrong fairy's control, even Hidden Wood's ruler wasn't safe. Iron Flutter brandished her wand. That witch of a fairy was going to put a spell on me. Everyone else has been searched. You were the last to see it. I braced myself. This would be a great time for Gran's "now you see it, now you don't" disappearing spell. The detective turned her back to the interrogation mirror and gave 3 tiny flicks of her wand, plus a swish. The hairs on my neck raised, and the smell of bitter grapes filled my nostrils. She'd cast her "Tell me no lies" spell, which was illegal without a warrant. Where's the wand? The truth pulled from my stomach like it was on a string. I gritted my teeth against her power, but Iron Flutter was a master at this. My lips moved on their own. I don't know. She sank to her chair, staring at her wand, sweat beading on her forehead. Iron Flutter was out of time. The door opened and a uniformed fairy motioned for me to follow him. Iron Flutter handed over my wand. Outside, I took a long breath. Everything smelled of mint, pine, and freedom. Festo waited around the corner, my faithful companion. I hopped on his back. Let's find where you hid that fetching stick I gave you today. We raced through the underbrush, bobbing and weaving. The retrieval spell blasted from my wand, lifting the silky hair on Festo's neck. A moment later, his new stick hurtled through the air, landing in my waiting hand. I fingered the soft wood, worn from hundreds of years of use, my heart hammering. Finally, after months of planning, I'd done it. In the distance, the first chime of midnight sounded from the castle tower. I held the new wand aloft and cast Gran's "Be Mine" spell. Hidden Wood would soon find out there was a new fairy godmother in town. I hope you enjoyed listening to The Midnight Embezzlement by Jennifer Dyer, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Jennifer, go to jenniferdyrbooks.com to get your free copy of The Midnight Disappointment. 2 potions, a botched delivery, and a mess of spells to reverse before midnight? No problem. I'll have a direct link for it in the show notes. This last story is the most spot on for New Year's, though it might not seem like it at first. So listen close for the connection. It's written by Ryan Bush, an archaeologist who loves digging up old stories almost as much as he loves writing new ones. Inspired by such varied literary influences as J.R.R. Tolkien, Alistair MacLean, and his own father, Ryan strives to craft entertaining, uplifting tales that stick in the mind long after the final page has been turned. Please enjoy Janice by Ryan Bush.
Frigid winds tore through the night, slicing through our thick clothing. I bundled the babe in my arms tighter, shielding the sleeping cherub against the cold. Battle cries rose in the distance, but we stood in silent darkness. The grim faces of my 3 human companions were pinched with cold and determination. At first, they'd seemed wary of my strange powers and appearance, but they'd long since grown accustomed to me. Good. I need them. We slowly approached the castle looming above us. Feeble torchlight from its walls ineffectively fought the surrounding darkness. I stumbled wearily on a rock, nearly dropping my charge, and one of the men steadied me. Our army had fought fiercely for 3 days and nights, and we were the first to break through the enemy lines and reach the castle. Still, our task was not complete. We had until midnight before the world was set askew. Dozens of soldiers guarded the castle's main gate, and the silhouettes of others stood atop the walls.
"We can't go that way, Lord Janus," one man murmured. "Could you get through a sally gate?"
"Easily," I replied. "See what you can find." 2 of them melted into the darkness, and 1 remained with me. I unwrapped my cloak to peek at the infant in my arms, still sleeping, thankfully. Midnight had not yet struck. A few minutes later, my men returned and whispered,
"There's a small door, just outside the fortress's eastern wall. 2 guards atop the wall, but we don't know how many are beyond."
"Lead the way." We sneaked along the hillside, muffling our curses as we stumbled on hidden rocks, but nobody seemed to hear us. The minutes ticked by, and I feared we would be too late, but we reached the gate without the dreaded tolling of midnight. Sure enough, 2 Oblivion guards stood on the battlements above us, but when I pressed my hand to the door, I felt no other soldiers beyond. The master of this keep was more foolish than I'd thought. Then again, his foolishness was what had forced our hands. At my whispered signal, my men fired crossbows, deadly bolts eliminating the guards above us. I murmured a command to the heavy door.
"In the name of the Master, and the powers he has bestowed on me, I command you, open."
The bars holding the door fell away, and the door groaned open. We hurried inside, passing through long stone corridors. Great tapestries covered the walls, and enormous grandfather clocks loomed in nooks and niches at every turn, their pendulums swinging ominously. The lord of this castle had done well for himself this year. Too well. I watched ahead and behind for an attack, but none came, and we reached the great throne room without incident. Enormous festival tables brimmed with food and drink, and the scattered, empty chairs spoke of guests hastily fleeing our arrival. The lord of the castle sat on a throne at the head of the room, the year's master. He was an old man now, hunched and gray.
"Thieves!" he roared, his face twisted with rage. "Traitors! You gave me this throne, and now you come to take it away! Begone! For I am the master here, and no other."
"No," I rebuked him. "You were given stewardship over this year, and this year alone. Your time has ended. Leave with dignity, or we will remove you." Suddenly, armed men leaped from behind every door and tapestry with wild cries, and my soldiers jumped to meet enemy blades with their own. One ruffian rounded a corner behind me, his sword thrusting at my throat, but at the sight of my second face, he faltered. I flicked my wrist, and with a burst of my powers, he shot backward into the hallway. I threw a knife, and as he rounded the corner once more, it drove into his chest, felling him. Another villain slashed at my arm, spilling golden blood, and I roared in pain. One of my men sprang to my side with a cry, guarding my wounded side. I gestured at a second enemy with my good hand, and he took a step forward, then a dozen more, moving rapidly through time until he smashed into a wall. 3 more men tried to charge us through a doorway, but I commanded the door, slamming it shut in their faces. Thumps and screams sounded as they ran into the solid wood, but the door held. I smiled grimly. It would never open again without my leave. We slowly drew near the throne, swords and powers cutting a path through the enemy. The old man howled for his men to save him, but I whirled, casting my powers wide with all my remaining strength, flinging his soldiers backward through time, their screams fading into the hours and days prior. Silence now reigned, and I hauled the old man from the throne. "Your year is over," The humans cling to their stewardships selfishly, but I expected better from you." The old man whimpered, and I dropped him unceremoniously on the floor. "Go, live on in the memories of men, but do not linger. I pray the Master shows you mercy." I gently took the still sleeping baby from the folds of my robes, placing him on the throne. Days of feasting and ceremony should have preceded this moment, but it would suffice. Throughout the castle, dozens of grandfather clocks began chiming their heavy tolls. When the 12th note struck, the baby opened his eyes and sat up, and the throne began to glow. My men cheered, and a moment later, one of them approached me with mugs of cider from the feast tables. "Happy New Year, sir," he said, and we toasted.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Janice by Ryan Bush, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Ryan, go to ryanbush.substack.com, where he has occasional writing updates and free short stories. Right now, you can snag his short story, A Time Between Spaces. I'll have the direct link in the show notes. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate these stories, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. If you haven't checked out my other podcast, Blood of the Stars, the new year is a great time to do it. So far, I've released 43 chapters of my epic fantasy novel, Blood of the Stars, on the podcast, which is over 13 hours of epic fantasy for free. And because it's narrated by Paeter and me, I think you'll find a comfortable familiarity to listening to that after listening to Finding Fantasy Reads. You can find it on all the same podcasting platforms under Blood of the Stars, or you can listen on my website at karynnorton.com/audio. I'll also have easy links in the show notes. I hope you all enjoy ringing in the new year this evening. Stay safe. As always, thank you all for listening, and happy reading.